The rise of the monastic orders, from around the 4th century onwards, was an attempt by religio-philosophic men to interpret the Holy Scriptures in the best possible way, so ensuring a good and pious life was lived by all, and salvation was guaranteed. The question facing the Christian faithful during for many, living under Roman rule, going into the desert, and renouncing the materiality of the world, was the best way to connect with God. The deserts of Syria and Arabia were filled with wandering hermits, who had pledged themselves to poverty, celibacy and a life of prayer. These were called eremitics, from the Greek eremos, which means desert. One of the most famous of these is Saint Anthony the Great, whose biography was written by Athanasius. From a wealthy family, Anthony gave away most of his inheritance, and went to live in the desert, to practice an ascetic life, under the guidance of a hermit monk. But it was found that many of these monks became psychologically disturbed by their isolated existence, and gradually a more organized form of communal living, called cenobitic, was formed. The early founders of such holy collectives were Saint Pachomius, who opened the first monastery in Asia Minor in 318, and Saint Basil, who developed the concept further by writing down formal rules of behavior. This formalizing of the pious life would become a guide to monks for generations and sent on required daily devotions, the level of work to be done, and the extent of privation. The cenobitic regime adopted the same ascetic practices of the hermit monks, but different orders would interpret the level of deprivation to differing degrees. The principle, however, was always the same, that in order to best serve Christ, an individual must detach himself from the ordinary world, and commit entirely to a religious lifestyle. Other orders followed in the succeeding centuries, including those developed by the rule of the Master, an anonymous collection of regulations, and Saint Benedict, which was to become the most widespread in Europe. But prior to Benedict was a man called John Cassian, whose beliefs were formulated originally by contact with the desert hermits, and by them was encouraged to found the first monastery in Western Europe, in southern Gaul. Cassian's teachings survive through the Benedictine rule, which continues today as the basis of many modern monastic orders. The rule of Saint Benedict allows for a community of monks to operate under the authority of an abbot, and live by the spirit of the motto Pax Peace, and Ora et Labora, pray and work. The harmonious balance of the rule, which can be adhered to as much by an individual as by a group, proved to be a successful formula, and the reason for its resilient survival. In the 11th century, a Florentine called Galberto Vistamini founded the Order of Vallombrosa, literally Shaded Valley, which copied the rule of Saint Benedict, but made it more severe and penitential. They adopted scourging for any breach of rule, made silence compulsory, insisted on poverty, and the monks were restricted to living solely within the monastic enclosure. Unlike the Benedictines, they did not work, but spent all their time in blessed contemplation. The 12th and 13th centuries saw the development of a number of new orders, notably the Franciscans, the Dominicans and the Carmelites. The arrival of more complex societies, centering around cities, called for new forms of monastic organization, and new ways of communicating the teachings of Christ to the general population. The Dominicans were trained to take the gospel to the people in their local language. The Franciscans were extreme ascetics, and completely loyal to the Pope, while the Carmelites were primarily a contemplative order, and subject to the blessings of the Virgin Mary. The last mendicant, or charitable, order to be formally endorsed by a pope, were the Augustinians in 1243. They based their rule on the teachings of Saint Augustine of Hippo of the 4th century, and emphasized the absolute value of the pursuit of truth through learning, and through mutual affection. They believed that love was universally a free gift from God, part of His gracious nature, and not earned. The inclusiveness of their beliefs was the main drive behind a significant missionary outreach on an international level, and which persists to this day.